They told us we didn't belong. One night, one rejection, and it all could have ended there. But instead of staying silent, I decided to act. This is my story, our story, of turning humiliation into hope, exclusion into inclusion. From the spark of a single moment, we built something extraordinary, a table for everyone. A space where no one is turned away, and everyone knows they belong. Join me at the table for all. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. The city lights of Los Angeles sparkled against the twilight sky as I pulled into the valet at Eminence Dining. This wasn't just another night, it was one of those rare evenings I had carved out of my packed schedule to celebrate. The kind of night where life slows down just enough to remind you why it's worth pushing through the chaos. Are you sure about this, Dad? Jaden's voice broke through my thoughts from the passenger seat. He was scrolling through his phone, eyebrows furrowed. I heard this place is, pretentious. I chuckled, catching his reflection in the rearview mirror. Trust me, Jay. Eminence Dining is exclusive, but it's also top tier. Perfect for the crew tonight. Besides, I've been here before. They know me. I could tell he wasn't convinced, but he shrugged and closed his phone as the valet opened his door. Tina and Jason were already waiting inside, along with a few other close friends. The air carried the faint aroma of jasmine mixed with the hum of nearby traffic. It felt like the beginning of a perfect night. The restaurant exuded sophistication. Its modern exterior glowed under soft lights, and inside, the atmosphere buzzed with quiet elegance. Waiters in tailored uniforms glided between tables, crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over mahogany accents. I walked up to the hostess, confidence in my step. Reservation for Smith, party of 6. Her smile faltered as she glanced at the screen. One moment, sir. She disappeared into the back, leaving us standing there. Tina shot me a look, eyebrows raised. Minutes passed before she returned, her expression noticeably cooler. I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. We don't have a reservation under your name. I frowned. That's impossible. I confirmed it this morning. Her gaze darted away. Unfortunately, we're fully booked tonight. I apologize for the inconvenience. Before I could respond, Tina stepped forward, her voice sharp. We walked past 3 open tables on the way in. Care to explain that? Jason leaned in closer to me. Something's off, he muttered. As if on cue, the manager appeared. He was a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, his smile practiced and cold. Is there a problem here? I turned to him, still holding on to the hope that this was some misunderstanding. Apparently, our reservation doesn't exist anymore. Mind explaining how that happened? His demeanor didn't falter. I apologize for the confusion, Mr. Smith, but we treat all our guests equally. If there's no reservation, I'm afraid we can't accommodate you. The weight of the stares around the room settled on my shoulders. The whispered conversations. The furtive glances. This wasn't just a mistake, it was deliberate. The air thickened with an unmistakable tension. Tina's voice cut through the silence. Are you seriously turning away Will Smith? You've got to be kidding me. The manager's smile tightened, his words clipped. We're at full capacity. Now, if you'll excuse me. My patience was wearing thin, but I knew better than to let anger take over. I turned to my friends, my voice calm but firm. Let's go. Will, Tina began, but I shook my head. Let's go, I repeated. As we stepped out into the night, the celebratory mood that had carried us here was gone. The air felt colder, sharper, the city lights suddenly too bright. Jaden caught up to me as we reached the car. Why didn't you say something? He asked, his voice quiet but charged. You just let them win. I didn't respond right away. I unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat, the words forming in my mind but refusing to come out. As I stared at the steering wheel, one thought kept looping: this wasn't just about me. Not anymore. The drive home was suffocatingly quiet. Tina sat in the back seat with her arms crossed, radiating frustration. Jason stared out the window, his usually light-hearted demeanor replaced with simmering anger. Jaden was beside me, his silence louder than any argument he could have voiced. I couldn't get the scene at the restaurant out of my head. Every dismissive glance, every carefully worded refusal, it all felt like a statement, a sharp-edged message that we didn't belong. And I'd walked away from it. When we finally reached home, Tina was the first to speak, her voice heavy with disbelief. "I can't believe you just let them treat you like that. Treat us like that." Jason nodded, leaning against the kitchen counter. "You've got one of the biggest platforms in the world, Will. You could have called them out right there. Made them answer for it." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "You think I don't know that? What was I supposed to do? Start a shouting match in front of everyone? That's exactly what they'd want. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. That's not the point." Tina snapped, her voice rising. "You let them win by walking away. You let them humiliate us, and now they think they got away with it." Jaden, who had been quiet until now, chimed in. "She's right, Dad. You just left. What kind of message does that send?" The word stung, sharper than I expected. I looked at my son, saw the hurt in his eyes, and realized he wasn't just angry. He was disappointed. "I didn't want to make it worse," I said, my voice softer now. "You think I don't feel humiliated? I do. But reacting in the moment wouldn't have changed anything." Jaden shook his head and walked off, leaving the rest of us in heavy silence. Tina eventually left too, muttering something about needing to cool off. That left just Jason and me. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned back against the counter, watching me carefully. "You know this isn't just about tonight, right?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "You've got a chance to do something about it," he continued. "Not just for you, for all the people who've been through the same thing. You've got a voice, man. Use it." His words stayed with me long after he left. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the glow of the city lights seeped through the curtains, I sat in the living room with my phone in my hand. I scrolled through messages from friends and colleagues, all offering support or outrage. And then I saw something else, messages from people I didn't know. People sharing their own stories of being turned away, ignored, humiliated. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just us. The thought hit me like a wave. I had the platform, the reach, to do something. Not just react but act. I opened the camera app on my phone. The lens stared back at me, waiting. And I know we're not alone in this. I poured my heart out, not just about the humiliation but about the broader issue, how exclusion cuts deeper than words, how it's a reminder of battles we thought we'd already won. When I finished, I watched the video back once, hesitated for half a second, and then hit upload. As the video processed, my phone buzzed with a message from Tina. It was a simple one: "You okay?" For the first time all night, I felt like I might be. "I will be," I replied. The next morning, I woke up to a phone buzzing so loudly it might as well have been an alarm clock. Groaning, I reached over to silence it, only to find notifications flooding my screen. Tina's post had already gone viral, and my video, my raw, unfiltered words, was everywhere. I sat up, blinking away the haze of sleep as the realization hit me. This wasn't just gaining traction. It was a wildfire. #NotAtOurTable was trending on Twitter, Instagram, even Facebook. Stories from people all over the world poured in, some heartbreaking, some infuriating, but all sharing one thing: the sting of exclusion. Tina called before I could even process it all. "Will, have you seen this?" "I'm looking at it now," I said, scrolling through comments faster than my eyes could keep up. "This is big," she continued, her voice a mix of excitement and urgency. "People aren't just angry. They're telling their stories. They're naming names. This isn't just about Eminence Dining anymore, it's about every place that makes people feel like they don't belong." She was right. But as I scrolled, I noticed something else creeping into the mix. "Of course Will Smith's mad," one post read. "A rich celebrity upset he couldn't get his fancy dinner. Cry me a river." Another, "This is just another Hollywood stunt. Real people deal with worse every day." I set my phone down, the weight of those words settling into my chest. They weren't entirely wrong. I had privilege, resources, and a platform most people could only dream of. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't just about me, and I needed people to see that. The door creaked open, and Jaden poked his head in. "Dad, you're trending," he said, his tone somewhere between awe and amusement. "I noticed," I replied, motioning for him to come in. He plopped down in the chair opposite me, phone in hand. "You see what they're saying?" Eminence put out a statement. I grabbed my phone again and searched. Sure enough, the restaurant had posted an apology. "We regret the unfortunate incident involving Mr. Smith and his party. Eminence Dining strives to provide a welcoming experience for all guests and is committed to addressing any misunderstandings." I read it aloud, scoffing. Misunderstandings. That's what they're calling it. "They're just covering their backs," Jaden said. "But it's not working. Look at this." He showed me post after post, employees coming forward, customers sharing similar stories. The truth was spilling out in waves. One former employee claimed they were told to prioritize clientele who matched the brand image. Another shared how they were reprimanded for seating a family who didn't fit the aesthetic. This wasn't just a bad night for me. It was a pattern. Jason called not long after, his voice practically vibrating through the phone. "Will, you're blowing up, man. Did you see the hashtag? This thing's taken on a life of its own." "I saw it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is what we needed," he continued. "People are finally paying attention. And Eminence? They're scrambling. You've got them on the ropes, man." I wanted to share his enthusiasm, but my mind kept drifting to the backlash. The people questioning my motives. The ones doubting whether this mattered at all. "It's not about them being on the ropes," I said finally. "It's about making people feel like they belong." Jason paused, then let out a low whistle. "You're right. So what's the plan?" I didn't have an answer for him yet, but the question stayed with me long after we hung up. The movement was growing, and I knew I couldn't just sit back and let it play out. If this was going to mean something, I had to step up and lead. Later that evening, I sat with Tina and Jason in my living room, brainstorming. "We need to do something," Tina said, pacing the floor. "Something bigger than a video." Jason nodded. "People are hungry for more than just outrage. They want solutions. Ideas. Hope." I leaned back, rubbing my hands together. The wheels were turning, but I wasn't sure where they were going yet. And then it hit me. "What if we create our own table?" I asked. They both looked at me, confused. I sat forward. The restaurant thought we didn't belong at their table. "Fine. Let's build our own. A space where everyone's welcome. A dinner, an event, hell, a movement. We'll call it, the Table for All." Tina's eyes lit up. "I love it. But we'll need to move fast. The internet's attention span is short, and we've got their eyes right now." Jason grinned. Then let's make it happen. As I went to bed that night, I felt something I hadn't felt since leaving that restaurant: purpose. This wasn't just about fixing what went wrong. It was about creating something better. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. My phone was buzzing with more notifications, but this time, they didn't feel like weighty reminders of the problem. They felt like a call to action. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, sketching out ideas while Jaden wandered in, still groggy from sleep. He poured himself some cereal and plopped down across from me, staring at the mess of notes scattered over the table. "What's all this?" he asked between bites. "Planning something big," I said, tapping my pen against the notebook. "A dinner. But not just any dinner. A table where everyone belongs." Jaden raised an eyebrow. "Like a restaurant?" "More like an event," I said. "A night where people come together to celebrate who they are, through food, music, art. Everything that place denied us. I want to show them what it means to truly welcome people." He nodded slowly. "Sounds cool. You think it'll work?" "It has to," I said, more to myself than to him. Tina showed up not long after, ready to hit the ground running. She brought a whiteboard, some markers, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. Jason arrived shortly after, carrying the energy of someone who had been up all night thinking. "All right," Tina said, uncapping a marker. "We've got the idea. Now we need a plan." Finding the right space proved harder than we thought. We wanted something that felt inclusive, welcoming but not intimidating, elegant but not exclusive. Tina suggested a converted warehouse downtown, a space that had hosted art galleries and pop-up events. "Perfect," Jason said, clapping his hands together. "It's raw, it's real, and we can make it our own." When we reached out to the owners, they were hesitant at first. Hosting something so public came with risks, especially given the controversy surrounding Eminence Dining. But after some back and forth, and a heartfelt pitch from Tina, they agreed. Next came the chefs. We wanted a diverse lineup, representing different cultures and cuisines. Jason reached out to a friend who ran a food truck, while Tina called in favors from her contacts in the culinary world. I made a few calls myself, pitching the idea to chefs I knew would get it. "Will," one of them said over the phone, "this is exactly what our community needs." "I'm in." Slowly, the roster started to fill out. Nigerian jollof rice, Jamaican jerk chicken, Southern collard greens, Haitian griot, the menu was shaping up to be a culinary celebration of culture and identity. We didn't stop at food. Jason suggested live music, jazz, soul, and spoken word performances, and Tina reached out to local artists to create installations for the event. Each piece would tell a story of resilience and belonging, tying into the theme of the night. "This isn't just a dinner," Tina said. "It's an experience." Time, however, was not on our side. Social media momentum had given us a window, but it wouldn't last forever. Every day, something new captured the internet's attention. We had to act quickly or risk losing the energy that had fueled this movement. I felt the pressure building with each passing day. Calls with vendors ran late into the night. Emails piled up faster than I could respond. At one point, Jaden caught me staring at my notebook, my head in my hands. "You good, Dad?" he asked, concern in his voice. "Just a lot to do," I admitted. "And not enough time to do it." He hesitated, then smiled. "You've got this. I mean, you're Will Smith. You've faced aliens and robots. This is just dinner." I couldn't help but laugh. "Thanks, Jay. You're right. It's just dinner. A dinner that could change everything." There were moments when I questioned if we could pull it off. A few chefs backed out, citing concerns about backlash. Some sponsors wavered, nervous about aligning with something so polarizing. But every time I felt doubt creeping in, I thought about that night at the restaurant. The humiliation. The way Jaden looked at me, expecting more. Failure wasn't an option. As the pieces started to come together, we sent out invitations, bold, colorful cards that read, "The table for all, a celebration of belonging. Join us for an unforgettable evening of food, music, and unity. This is your seat. It's always been yours." When I held the first printed invitation in my hands, I felt a flicker of pride. This wasn't just an event anymore. It was a statement. The night before the event, I stood in the warehouse, staring at the rows of tables draped in white linens, the soft glow of string lights casting a warm glow across the room. The air was thick with the scent of spices and fresh herbs as chefs prepped in the makeshift kitchen. Jaden walked up beside me, his hands in his pockets. "It's looking good, Dad." "It is," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at me, a small smile playing on his lips. "You did it." "We did it," I corrected. The night of the event had finally arrived. Standing outside the warehouse, I could feel the buzz of anticipation in the air. Guests began to trickle in, families, activists, chefs, artists, all dressed in their best, their faces glowing with excitement. This wasn't just another night out. This was a movement, and everyone here felt it. The warehouse had transformed. Rows of tables stretched across the space, draped in crisp white linens and adorned with simple yet elegant floral arrangements. String lights hung from the rafters, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. The scent of spices and freshly cooked dishes filled the air, mingling with the hum of soft jazz from the corner stage. As I greeted guests at the door, Tina stood beside me, beaming. "You pulled it off, Will," she said, squeezing my arm. "Look at this." I smiled, but my chest was tight. This wasn't just about pulling it off. It was about proving something, both to the world and to myself. As the event unfolded, it became clear that this was more than just a dinner. It was a tapestry of stories and connections. Guests from all walks of life shared tables, laughing and talking as if they'd known each other for years. Chefs emerged from the kitchen to explain the heritage behind their dishes, each plate a story of culture and resilience. I paused near one table where a young artist was showing her sketches to a couple of chefs. At another, an elderly man was telling stories of his youth to a group of wide-eyed teens. The air crackled with a sense of belonging, of unity. Jason approached me, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Take a second to breathe," he said, handing me one. This is something special, man." I looked around, taking it all in. He was right. This wasn't just an event. It was a moment. Later in the evening, Tina took the stage to introduce me. Her words were heartfelt, her voice steady as she spoke about the journey that had led us here. When she called my name, the room erupted into applause. I stepped up to the microphone, my heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, I scanned the room, letting the moment settle. "Tonight," I began, "we're not just sharing a meal. We're proving a point. A point that we belong. That we deserve to be here. That every single one of us deserves a seat at the table." The room was silent, every eye locked on me. I could feel the weight of their stories, their struggles, and their hopes pressing against me. "This isn't just about one night," I continued. "It's about creating something bigger. A space where everyone feels welcome, no matter who they are. A space that celebrates us, our stories, our culture." I paused, my gaze falling on Jaden, who sat at a table near the front. His eyes were bright, his expression proud. "This is for all of us. For everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Tonight, we prove them wrong." The applause that followed was deafening. It echoed off the walls, filling the space with a wave of affirmation. For the first time since that night at Eminence Dining, I felt at peace. As I stepped off the stage, Jaden met me halfway. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled me into a tight hug. "You were amazing up there," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks, Jay," I said, my own voice wavering. "But I couldn't have done this without you." He pulled back, smiling. "You showed them, Dad. You showed all of us." Throughout the night, guests came up to share their gratitude. An elderly woman clasped my hands, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for making me feel seen." A young couple told me how they'd faced similar exclusion at another restaurant, how this night made them believe things could change. It was overwhelming, humbling. I realized that this was about so much more than what had happened to me. It was about everyone who had ever felt invisible, ignored, or dismissed. As the night wound down, I stood near the back of the room, watching as guests lingered, reluctant to leave. The jazz band played one last song, and the warm glow of the string lights seemed to wrap the space in a quiet magic. Jason joined me, a satisfied grin on his face. "We did it," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "We did," I replied, my chest swelling with pride. "And this is just the beginning." The morning after the event, I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone. The social media buzz from the night before was electric. Pictures and videos of the event flooded my feed, smiling faces, colorful dishes, music-filled moments. People weren't just sharing about the night, they were sharing their stories, their gratitude, their hope. But amid the positive posts, something else was gaining traction. Eminence Dining was back in the headlines, and not for the reasons they'd hoped. I clicked on an article titled "Eminence Dining's Dark Secret" and felt my stomach twist as I read. Former employees were coming forward, detailing policies that made the restaurant's exclusivity more sinister than sophisticated. One server claimed they'd been instructed to turn away certain patrons under the guise of being fully booked. Another revealed an unspoken dress code designed to alienate anyone who didn't fit the aesthetic. A whistleblower even shared internal memos discussing how to maintain the brand image by prioritizing wealthier, predominantly white clientele. My jaw tightened as I read the words. This wasn't just about one humiliating night, it was a system, a culture of exclusion masquerading as luxury. The restaurant's initial apology was already being dissected and dismissed as hollow. In an attempt to control the narrative, they announced plans for their own diversity dinner, which only made things worse. Social media erupted with calls of hypocrisy. Jason called mid-morning, his excitement almost vibrating through the phone. "Have you seen this, man? They're imploding. People are tearing them apart." "I've seen it," I said, my voice measured. "But this isn't about tearing them down." "Will, come on," he said, exasperated. "They brought this on themselves. This is justice." But it didn't feel like justice to me. I didn't want this to become a story about revenge. It wasn't about their downfall, it was about what we were building. Later that day, Eminence Dining held a press conference. The owner, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, stood at a podium in front of a throng of reporters. His face was composed, but his eyes betrayed his discomfort. "We deeply regret the incident involving Mr. Smith and his guests," he began, his voice tight. "It was never our intention to make anyone feel unwelcome." He went on to pledge diversity training for the staff and a review of the restaurant's reservation policies. But the words felt rehearsed, forced. The reporters weren't buying it. Their questions came fast and sharp, peeling back the polished veneer of the statement. "What do you say to former employees who claim they were instructed to turn people away based on appearance? How do you respond to allegations of systemic bias in your hiring practices?" The man's answers were vague, his composure cracking under the pressure. By the end of the press conference, it was clear that Eminence Dining wasn't just dealing with a PR nightmare, it was facing a reckoning. Tina called me later that night, her voice a mix of triumph and disbelief. "Did you see that press conference? They're unraveling." "I saw it," I said, leaning back in my chair. "They're trying to save face, but it's too late." She paused, her tone softening. "Does it feel like enough?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I admitted. "Because this isn't about them. It's about making sure no one else feels the way we did that night." As more stories came to light, it became clear that Eminence Dining wasn't the only establishment with discriminatory practices. Other high-end restaurants began facing scrutiny, their exclusivity questioned in the wake of the movement. This wasn't just a single battle anymore, it was a war against a culture that prioritized appearances over humanity. And while Eminence Dining was at the center of it, the spotlight was starting to shift toward a larger conversation about belonging and inclusion. As I scrolled through the latest headlines, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction that people were paying attention. Sadness for the countless stories of exclusion that were surfacing. Hope that this could be the beginning of something bigger. Jaden walked into the room and sat down beside me, his expression serious. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded, setting my phone down. "Yeah. Just thinking about what's next." "What do you mean?" "This isn't the end," I said. "It's just the beginning." The days following the event were a whirlwind. Social media was still alive with posts and hashtags, but something new was happening. I began receiving messages from people across the country, activists, community leaders, even ordinary folks who had been inspired by what we'd done. One message stood out: "We want to host a Table for All event here in Chicago. How can we make it happen?" It wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was a movement. I called a meeting with Tina, Jason, and a few others who had helped organize the event. We gathered around my dining room table, papers and laptop spread out, trying to figure out how to turn a one-night celebration into something lasting. "This has to be bigger than us," I said, glancing at the team. "People want to create their own tables, but we need to give them the tools to do it right." Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So, what are we talking about? A blueprint? A guide?" "Exactly," Tina chimed in, tapping on her laptop. "We create a toolkit, everything from finding a venue to recruiting chefs and artists. Maybe even a website where people can share their events." The idea began to take shape, a platform where communities could come together, share resources, and amplify the message of inclusion. By the end of the week, the first few Table for All spin-offs were already in motion. Chicago was hosting a dinner at a local community center. New York had plans for a block party. Even smaller towns were joining in, each putting their own unique spin on the concept. I watched in awe as the idea spread. Photos and videos flooded social media, showcasing the diversity and creativity of these gatherings. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, a ripple effect, growing stronger with each new table. But with growth came challenges. Some events struggled to find funding, while others faced backlash from local businesses who feared they were being targeted. A few groups reached out for guidance on handling media attention, unsure how to navigate the spotlight. We worked around the clock to support them. Tina drafted templates for press releases. Jason helped connect organizers with local sponsors. And I spent hours on the phone, offering advice and encouragement to anyone who needed it. "This is what we signed up for," Jason said one night as we wrapped up a particularly long meeting. "Movements don't just happen. They're built." One evening, I sat on my balcony, looking out at the twinkling lights of Los Angeles. Jaden joined me, leaning on the railing with a smile. "Dad, I saw a post about the dinner in Chicago," he said. "It looked amazing. People were just happy." I nodded, a swell of pride filling my chest. "That's the point, Jay. It's not just about what happened to us. It's about everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. He looked at me, admiration clear in his eyes. You really made a difference. I smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. We did. This isn't just me. It's everyone who showed up, everyone who cared enough to make a change. As the movement grew, so did its impact. Schools began organizing tables to foster inclusion among students. Churches and synagogues hosted interfaith dinners. Even corporations reached out, wanting to sponsor events as part of their diversity initiatives. For the first time, I felt like this wasn't just a response to one bad night. It was a shift, a chance to create something lasting. Months after the first Table for All dinner, I stood outside the now shuttered doors of Eminence Dining. The once bustling restaurant was quiet, its sleek facade now a relic of its own downfall. Where there had once been lines of luxury cars and velvet ropes, there was now nothing but an empty sidewalk and a "For Lease" sign. Jaden was beside me, his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked up at the building, then at me. So, this is where it all started. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the darkened windows. They tried to keep us out. And now, there's no one left to keep anyone out. There was no gloating in my voice. No satisfaction. Just a strange mix of sadness and resolve. This wasn't the ending, it was just another beginning. I turned to Jaden. You know, I've been thinking about what to do with this place. Yeah, he asked, curious. What's the plan? A permanent table for all, I said, the idea still fresh in my mind but already taking root. A space where people can come together, not just for one night, but whenever they need a seat. We'll host dinners, workshops, cultural events. A place for connection. Jaden's face lit up. That sounds incredible, Dad. It's not about replacing what was here, I said. It's about building something better. A few weeks later, we made the announcement. Standing in front of the former Eminence Dining, I spoke to a small crowd of reporters, community members, and supporters. This building was once a symbol of exclusion, I began. But today, we're turning it into something new. A place where everyone is welcome, where every culture is celebrated, and where no one is ever turned away. Welcome to the permanent home of the Table for All. The applause was overwhelming. As I looked out at the crowd, I saw familiar faces, Tina, Jason, Jaden, and new ones, all united by a shared vision. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. That night, I walked through the empty building, imagining what it would become. The sounds of laughter and conversation, the smells of food from every corner of the world, the art and music that would fill the space. It wasn't just a building, it was a promise. Jaden joined me, his steps echoing against the bare walls. You did it, Dad, he said, his voice filled with pride. You turned something ugly into something beautiful. We did it, I corrected, pulling him into a hug. This is for you, for us, for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. In the months that followed, the Table for All became a hub of activity. Every event brought new faces, new stories, and new connections. The movement had grown beyond anything I could have imagined, touching lives in ways I hadn't even considered. But the heart of it, the simple idea that everyone deserves a seat at the table, remained the same. 1 year after that fateful night at Eminence Dining, I stood on the stage at the newly opened Table for All, addressing a crowd that filled every corner of the space. A year ago, I began, we were told we didn't belong. But instead of accepting that, we created something better. We built our own table, a table for everyone. The applause was deafening, but it wasn't the sound that stayed with me. It was the faces, smiling, hopeful, proud. Faces that reminded me why this all mattered. This isn't the end, I said, my voice steady. It's just the beginning. Together, we'll keep building. We'll keep fighting. And we'll make sure that everyone, everywhere, knows they belong. As the crowd cheered, I stepped back, a sense of peace washing over me. This was my legacy, not just as an actor or a celebrity, but as someone who had chosen to turn humiliation into hope. And I knew, deep in my heart, that we were just getting started.